Welcome to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith. In this week's episode, we're going to visit with Dr. Michael Kenty, and he'll talk to us a little bit about what's in your tank as we get ready for planting season and growing season for many growers across the United States. We need to be thinking about what kind of carrier we're going to have inside of our tank and the importance of water and the quality of that water. He'll visit with us about AquaLenz, a new tool from the AGRIntelligence team. Then we're going to shoot over to Nashville, Tennessee, and visit with Jody Lawrence as he shares some insight on the grain markets on how that may be impacting your bottom line. And then finally, we're going to head out west to visit with one of our agronomists and learn about how the future may already be here as we explore how agronomy and agri-intelligence come together to provide growers solutions for the future. Stay tuned for FieldLink. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the FieldLink podcast. Today's episode is dedicated to water. As you all know, water is a very, very important piece of our lives. We need it to drink, to grow plants, and just generally for the entire life cycle. So we're going to focus on water today, and to help us better understand the complexity of water and how it can impact the production of agriculture, and also impact a little bit about how water can impact the herbicides that you use, the insecticides that you use, as well as the fungicides. Joining us is Dr. Michael Kenty, who's a product specialist in Memphis, Tennessee for the Southern Business Unit at Helena. And Michael, welcome to FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it.
Well, Michael, lots going on in the area of water this year. It doesn't matter where you live. Lots of drought is certainly taking place. And, there's always going to be complexity when it comes to irrigation management, just general water in itself. But there are some things we can control when it comes to managing water. But before we get into the weeds of better water, managing our water as it relates to utilizing that carrier for herbicides, let's tell the audience a little bit about you. Where's home and where'd you grow up? What's your story?
Well, I live in Collierville, Tennessee. Been up here, I think I moved up here in 95 when I took a job with American Sign, but I began my life as an Air Force brat, which back in the day, I think that was a good thing. I was forced to learn to make friends quickly because moved almost every year. It was rare that I spent 2 years in a school, but as I got towards high school, I chose to quit following my father around and asked my grandparents could I kind of have a foundation. So I moved to Greenville, Mississippi, which was home for about 17 or 18 years. The family pushed me into pre-med, and fortunately one of my grandfather, who was a surgeon's patients, was a soybean breeder, and he introduced me to ag, the science side of ag. And so took that route and got a BS in agronomy at Mississippi State, followed with a master's in integrated pest management at Delta State, and then a doctorate in genetics at University of Florida. And career-wise, while I was working on master's, I worked for Sandoz, which is part of it is in BASF now. The majority of it is part of the Syngenta company. I left there, was a soybean breeder for about 10 years, and then decided to go back into what I call the killing side of the business where I'd started, and went to work for American Sign, and they disbanded and sold off to BASF, and I came to work for Helena in 2000 to manage our nutritional products in the Southern Business Unit. And then in 2008, I was asked to manage the killing portfolio. And now I'm kind of doing both, killing and production side.
And so, Michael, you clearly got a lot of experience, in agriculture. You covered a lot of geography for Helena over the years. Today we're going to talk a little bit about water and water management, specifically about a product called AquaLenz. While we certainly catch the news all of the time, learning about the drought monitor, and we've got certainly, some tough times in certain parts of the country, West Texas, and certainly up in the Pacific Northwest. Things are pretty dry in certain markets. Well, we're not going to really focus on irrigation today or get necessarily that side of the business as it relates to water. We're going to talk about water management when applying chemistry to our crops and the importance. And boy, managing water today in your tank is as critical as ever been, especially with some of the challenges and shortages we have in some of our chemistry. So, Michael, would you tell us a little bit why growers should really take a look at a product like AquaLenz to better understand the quality of water that they have in their tank?
Water is the predominant carrier of all the inputs from a herbicide, insecticide, fungicide, and even nutritional products and bionutritional products that growers apply, predominantly foliar, but sometimes in furrow at planting. And with water being the main carrier, most growers until recent years, assume water's water. It's clear, it looks fine, nothing's wrong. But there's I think it's 7 or 8 different traits that water has that can impact how your herbicide performs, your insecticide, your fungicide, or even a nutritional. So, if you don't test your water, you don't know what you're starting with, just going about the normal, okay, I'm going to use this herbicide, I'm going to use this insecticide. If you're not addressing water issues that impact that chemistry, you're wasting money. You're creating scenarios where you'll have to retreat because of lack of performance, or you're creating scenarios where you can actually have partial kill, which can ultimately lead to resistance, which is a whole nother aspect of it. It's kind of funny when Helena started going down this path, analyzing water for suitability of irrigation was kind of second nature to people that irrigate. But you talk to them about, well, what about your spray water for your herbicide? Oh, the water's fine for that. So and the part of the problem is basic suppliers may, on their labels, they may talk about you might need to adjust the pH, but beyond that, there's not much discussion. It's like they're not paying attention to the chemistry in the water. The University Extension centers until recent years have not paid much attention to water quality, and especially in the past 2 years, it seems all the universities in the market that I cover, and most of the basics are asking questions, trying to learn, and then in turn help the customers learn how to get the maximum performance out of what they're applying. So, it's a simple fix. Take a water sample. We use Waypoint Labs in Memphis for our business unit, and then they analyze the data and we produce a report in AquaLenz, and then that tells you what's wrong, and then once you understand what's wrong, you can start addressing the specific water traits to maximize that herbicide application or insecticide or fungicide.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for growers to really understand, you're making a big investment in your herbicide or nutritional or insecticide or fungicide. And boy, this understanding your carrier and really what makes up that water is very important for the full, I guess, for you to extract the entire investment out of it. There's a lot of science in that chemistry. And boy, this is just that final step to really ensure that you're getting the most, the best performance, I guess, out of that particular herbicide or that insecticide.
Exactly. And a year like even last year, 2021, but especially 2022, with supply constraints on major products like glyphosate, clethodim, some of the insecticides. If you're just going in blindly, doing a 10-gallon per acre load or 15-gallon per acre load, or even by air a 2-gallon per acre load, and not addressing the water quality, for example, with clethodim, we have a product called Tapout. There's all kind of other clethodums. They all have an Achilles heel. If there are carbonates and bicarbonates in the water, which you can usually associate with elevated pH over 6.5, you can make the application, but because of the carbs and bicarbs, you may only get 50% control of the grass. So that's not cost effective for the grower. It can lead to resistance to clethodim if you give a sublethal dose, and all you got to do is drop the pH to get it acidic below 6, and the problem goes away. The carbs and bicarbs don't. The chemical definition is a little more detailed, but they basically disappear. And a good analogy of addressing that is if you drink a carbonated beverage, whether it's a Coca-Cola or a Michelob Ultra or something, you drink enough of it, the acid in your stomach is going to make you release the carbon dioxide, by burping. What dropping the pH in water basically does the same thing. The carbonates and bicarbonates gas off. So the spray tank basically burps. And you don't have those to interfere with the efficacy. You're going to get 90, 100% utilization of what you're applying. So you're saving money. You're avoiding a retreatment. And that's just, the carbonates, bicarbonates, and clethodim is just one of the many products that we use in day-to-day operations on most farming operations that could benefit from knowing what the water contains, and then what you're going to spray, and then how to address the issue and maximize efficacy and prevent any problems.
Michael, that's a really great, real-world example. So help us better understand the AquaLens report. When it comes back to the grower, does it simply point out where some of the deficiencies are in this specific water test?
It does, because what the AquaLens reports is takes the lab analysis from Waypoint Laboratories, and what most people think of pH. My pH is high, my pH is low, and I got to address that. But what we found, hardness, the amount of calcium, magnesium, and other cations in the water, which you cannot see. It's clear water. They can still be there. We think hardness is the most important trait. That is followed by pH, which is followed by iron, which is specific to certain products, and carbonates, bicarbonates, sodium, and chloride. That's the main, those are the things we look for on the sample. So when you get an AquaLens report back, if you look at it and your hardness is below 200, then hardness is there, but it's not an issue because it's below the threshold where you got to start using increased rates of water conditioners to address hardness. So hardness is under 200, look at pH. If the pH is over, I like things to pH to be below 6. Depending on what I'm spraying, it could be 5.8, or if I'm spraying something like glyphosate, I really need it down about 2.8 or 3. So picking the correct water conditioner that'll take the pH down where you need to be for that application. So moving on down, the iron is a cation, but it's not widespread across our business unit. There are pockets of it. And generally, if you got hard water, you probably got potential for high iron. And you address the hardness, you address the iron. The carbonates and bicarbonates, if they're elevated, all you got to do is drop the pH. And, like I told you earlier, they'll burp. Sodium is a cation. It can be sequestered with some of the water conditioners with sequestering agents like Quest, AccuQuest Interactive. And then chloride, it's usually associated with sodium, which it's more of a problem with irrigation water and salt. But if you have high enough salt content in the water that you're using as a spray source for spraying pesticides, the salt can cause injury on its own that kind of mimics some herbicide injury, and it kind of confuses things. So just knowing that, either A, if you've got real salty water, you might need to look for another source. If you don't have an option, then you need to definitely take steps to sequester the sodium or manage it as best you can so you minimize any negative impact.
I think you bring up a really good point. There's a lot of different, challenges in our spray water, depending upon where you live. To your point earlier, if you're in some areas that may be a little higher in iron, you have some sodium, some carbonators. The long story short is everybody really truly does need to test their water annually. Is that pretty accurate?
Yes, unlike soil samples, which typically the recommendations is pull your soil samples every 3 years, especially for the large row crop like corn, soybeans, cotton, rice. But with water, because you're in an area with a lot of rainfall, you end up diluting the problems as the water gets into the aquifers. You go west of I-35 in the western part of my territory, which is going through a drought right now, your aquifer starts depleting and your problems get magnified. So to me, it's best to do a sample, depending on where you are in the geography, from January through as late as early March. Pull the sample before you start spraying. So you get the AquaLens report back, our salesman can sit with our customer and say, okay, you're going to be spraying glyphosate, so this is what we need to do. You're going to be spraying glufosinate or Liberty, this is what you need to do. End of the season, we're going to be spraying the defoliant, simethicone, we need to do this. So with that one sample, knowing what is going to be sprayed or planned to be sprayed on all the crops that the customer may have, sitting down with the customer in about an hour's time, you can map out what you need to do for each spray throughout the season to address the water issues, because I've yet to find a product that we sell that is not impacted by some trait in water. Some of it's not as harsh of response as it would be with high carbonates and bicarbonates to clethodim, or very hard water is to glyphosate, but there's always something. And in all the water samples that I've looked at over the course of my career with Helena, there's been one sample that I question, was it actually pulled out of a well, out of the groundwater, because it was so perfect. It was ideal, perfect pH, no carbs, no bicarbs. Hardness was like 10 parts per million, which is nothing. There was no sodium, and I'm still not convinced they didn't pull a trick on me and use something, like distilled water with something mixed with it. But most water samples have something that is out of whack that needs to be addressed, and you can't ignore it. And because, like, if I get called on a complaint with a herbicide, first question I ask, did you test the water? And the second was, if you didn't, did you just as a precaution use a water conditioner? And if they say no to both of those, a lot of times that's where I start looking, because usually with most herbicides, if you didn't address the water, that leads to part of the problem on performance. So it's continuing education of the grower, helping keep our sales force and agri-intelligence personnel trained up on what's the best solution for that chemistry. Because we've gone beyond just testing the water. Is Quest the best water conditioner for this product, or is Interactive, or is Diversify?
So Michael, how many should growers consider testing their water a couple times a year based on, Mother Nature and changes in the aquifer?
No, it's usually, I would do it early in the year, because my understanding from the people that study water and soil relations, it takes almost a full year for what happened, like the rains that are happening in Collierville, Tennessee today. The water from the rains probably will not be in the aquifer doing anything for months. So the consensus is test it once a year. Same with irrigation water, once early in the season. The only time that I will personally make a recommendation to pull a water sample, if we've already had it, if we got some weird complaint, either the pesticide's not working, the crop is responding weird, after an irrigation event, then we would test it, because we would do other tests beyond the standard water conditioning. We might look for nitrates. We might, one of the things we don't routinely look for is solids. Like if somebody uses paraquat and they use a full rate and they get no kill, the first question I have is there any clay content in the water? Because you can have some clay content and the water still look clear, but if there's any clay in the water sample, it binds immediately with paraquat and you're just spraying water. So that would be the only time I would call for another sample to be pulled and analyzed.
Michael, one of the questions that we may get if you're a grower out there listening is, what does an AquaLenz test cost? What's my investment for that type of information?
Good question, because that is probably the number one question I get, not only from customers but salesmen asking. And it's $65 is what we charge in our business unit. And somebody think, man, $65 for one sample, that's not worth it. But you got to put it in perspective. And if you use an analogy that I'm a 1,000-acre soybean, corn, cotton farmer, I'm not going to make one application across all those acres. I'm going to make multiple. So you divide $65 by 1,000 acres, so you're down to 65 cents. But if I'm making 7, 8, 9 applications that season over that acre, you're talking fractions of a penny to have all the information to provide you the best insurance that you're going to make the most out of the pesticides and nutritionals that you're spraying. And I don't know of any cheaper insurance a grower can have, because of supply issues, the prices of the herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides have moved up. But if you only get X amount of glyphosate and you don't have free amount and you only get to do one application per season, you better make that application count. So to me, $65 is really not even something to worry about. It's just a very sound investment in an operation to keep our customers profitable and doing what they love to do, grow crops and fiber for the Americans.
Michael, one of the myths that I hear, from a lot of growers as well as sales reps talking over the time is, I pull from a city source, of water for my tank, spray water. I should be good. That's not always the case, though, correct? No.
Most cities add stuff to the water to make it more, healthy to drink. For example, in Rolling Fork, Mississippi, there is something they add to the water that for whatever reason, when we put our product Coron Metro 10B in there, it salts out. Do not know. I don't know what. I think it's a high load of fluoride because we tried to pin it down. But you go 1 mile outside of the city and go to a well, there's no issue. And then like the sugarcane area near Thibodaux, there's a lot of our customers that are on a city water line. All the pH is high, and all of them have high carbonates. But it's city water, you can drink it, it's fine, but from a spraying standpoint, high pH, high carbonates is not good. So just because you're pulling city water, do not assume it's okay. The only water that would be okay to just use as is if you have a source of distilled water.
Gotcha. Well, and that's obviously challenging to come by, having that full distilled source all the time for spray tank water. But Michael, you bring up some really great points here today, and especially during some of these, supply challenging times, it's important for growers to know exactly what's in their tank, and really the only way to do that is to use this AquaLenz test from our AGRIntelligence team to better understand what's inside of our tank in order that our team can make the best recommendations for a water conditioner that or an agent that might best fit that particular situation. So Michael, we want to thank you for your time and joining us here in FieldLink and bringing to our attention the importance of water and water quality. We look forward to having you join us again. And folks, we encourage you to reach out to your Helena representative and ask for an AquaLenz test as you prepare for your spring planting season and get ready to apply your chemistry.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Hey, we're excited to have Jody Lawrence joining us here today to give us a quick update from his perspective of what's going on in the grain markets. Jody, welcome to FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill. Good to be back.
All right. Hey, definitely an awful lot happening in the grain markets here this past week, and we hit some highs in some cases, or come close to some all-time highs in many cases in corn as well as cotton. Jody, what's your perspective in the grain markets today?
You got several things at work, even though corn pulled back a little bit today. You're really talking about the concern over the unusually cold, wet spring and the seemingly slow start that we're off to in U.S. planting. You've got a lot of speculative money still coming into the markets. I say speculative is more hedge money because we saw the March numbers were the highest in 50 years.
What's the wheat looking like from your perspective?
Wheat's up about $1 in the last 2 weeks to the lowest ratings this week since 1996. And although that doesn't have the logic of why wheat would be down today, some days are a little bit counterintuitive to the news. And you're looking at just the potentially very long tail of the Russian invasion and occupation of Ukraine that really puts both of them as world producers and exporters as a big question mark moving forward. And when you look at wheat having rallied back up to the high end of the range, and corn, July corn and December corn have each made new contract highs both days this week. And I think December corn is 11 of the last 13 days has made new contract highs. So a lot going on. Beans are holding up, and they've moved to overnight, and they closed a little higher today, but they came off those highs to the highest that we saw since the spike around the invasion. So all of them either at new contract highs or at the very top of the ranges since Russia invaded Ukraine.
Well, that invasion story continues to impact the grain markets. I heard the other day a report, I think from a food security standpoint, we're yet to really feel that impact, and that's probably somewhat reflective of these grain markets. But we don't always think about that here in the U.S. where, countries like Africa, where Egypt, I heard the other day, 44% of the wheat that's imported in Egypt comes from Ukraine as well as Russia. That's certainly going to impact, their food security as we look into, 22, as well as Somalia was well over 90%. So certainly a lot of chaos in the wheat market today. And then we couple it with some tough markets in the West, or I should say growing conditions in Western United States.
Yeah, certainly a lot of factors going on. And I think they will continue to play an importance with, now you kind of shuffle the deck a little bit with certainly U.S. planting weather over the next 2 to 3 weeks being at the top of it. Another story today, because China is having their lockdown periods because their policy is 0% tolerance for COVID, and the restrictions and their lockdowns caused the International Monetary Fund to come out today with lower than expected projections for China's and world economic growth. And if you take China as a possible, see a slowdown in their economy, that means a slowdown of their raw material use, which goes across the board, not just corn and beans, but everything else. So, some cross currents right here, but it's certain none of this points towards a long-term downtrend that all these that the market's tightness has been solved.
Still a really good opportunity for growers, to take some positions in some cases, and certainly encourage them to reach out to you or to their trading advisors to keep on top of this ever evolving marketplace.
Yeah, I've had discussions every day with farmers. They look up at the board and know that they can get $8 cash crop, and in a lot of cases, you could get over $7.50 cash new crop for fall delivery, and they're just scratching their heads thinking, "What am I doing? Not selling." But the hard reality of it is this: there is a lot of indecision up here because just like 2012 and 13, you see the opportunity, but you also don't want to be left in the dust if we end up going back to cool, wet conditions and the crop goes in more slowly than expected. And then we get a pollination issue or, any number of things. The next thing you know, you see a 9 and an 8 in front of old crop and new crop corn, and you see beans making new all-time highs at, $18, $19 that you want to be responsible, but you also don't want to just let history dictate what you're doing in really these kind of once in a lifetime situations in these markets.
All right. Well, Jody, we want to thank you for joining us here this week on FieldLink. And if folks need to reach out to you, how can they contact you?
Well, get in touch with your local Helena retail outlet and your salesperson, and we can get you added to the newsletter. And all my contact information is on the bottom of the newsletter.
All right. Jody, thanks again for joining us here on FieldLink this week, and we appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith. We're really excited today to be recording here with our division agronomist, Agri-Intelligence agronomist, Luis Benvenutti. I'm going to get my Spanish down here shortly. Well, Luis is an agronomist for the desert region, the Western Business Unit out in California and Arizona, and he's joining us here today, and we're really excited to have him here. For over 20 years, Agri-Intelligence been really the cornerstone for Helena Agri-Enterprises, and a lot of folks don't really realize that our precision platform or precision data platform has been around that long. And we're certainly committed to coming up with different tools for growers, for all crops across the entire country. And, growers in the West, specifically in the desert region, have unique needs, especially in the year 22, when there's been, some announcements with, different challenges across some states. The state of Arizona, for example, just announced last fall that there's going to be a reduction of about 20% water, which can be drawn from the Colorado River. And in this region, it is a major source of irrigation for growers, and it's a critical thing and for producers in this geography. And today, AgriIntelligence certainly has a tool, several tools that can help us in that area. But before we get going too far, I want to introduce Luis and bring him in here. And Luis, glad to have you here on FieldLink.
Hi.
So, Luis, tell us a little bit about you. Where's home? Tell us your story. What's your journey? How did you end up with Helena in Arizona?
Hey, thank you, Will, for having me. Well, I'm originally from Puerto Rico. I grew up in tropical farming. When I say tropical farming, I mean coffee, plantains, banana. I went to college, University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez. I did a degree in mechanical ag technology. After I graduated from college in 2013, I moved to the United States to work for Bayer Crop Science as a breeder assistant. And from there, I worked with them for 5 years. And while working with Bayer, I did a master in computer science. When I finished my master, that's when I moved with Helena. I became the division agronomist with Helena in 2018. And been covering the desert area, which goes from Tucson, Arizona, all the way to Riverside County in California.
Wow.
How I got in agriculture, where basically I grew up around coffee trees, bananas, plantains since I was, a little kid. And I have passion for this. This is what I said, this is what I want to do. Never imagined myself working in the desert, different crops. Nothing here is similar to what I have back home. But yeah, very fortunate to be in this area growing pretty much over 200 crops.
Wow, it's that's quite a story, quite a journey from Puerto Rico all the way out to the desert area now. So tell us a little bit back home. Multiple crops. You mentioned coffee and bananas. And did you grow up on a farm, or were you actively involved in that area, the agriculture?
My family have a little farm. Yes, so yeah. I grew up in a farming operation. Small, excellent. But basically it was about 5 acres. But when you talk about tropical farming, 5 acres is a lot.
Yeah. Wow. And that's far different from where you're at today in the desert region. From probably how many inches of rain did you have in Puerto Rico where you typical year?
In the area where I grew, we get around 100 inches of rain per year.
100 inches of rain. Oh my goodness.
And from 100 to 7.
To 7 inches or less than a year. It just depends on we get one storm a year or so throughout the desert region. Well, that's exciting. Certainly a lot of experience there, Luis. One of the things that you're charged with is helping lead and guide a lot of folks in our field, and specifically on the agronomy side of our business and our agri-intelligence platform. California and Arizona are a little bit different in terms of who can actually make recommendations compared to other parts of the country. You have a PCA, which is a pest control advisor license, correct? This is a requirement for anybody that's making a recommendation in these states, and it's far different than the rest of the country. Can you expand on some of the, processes to become a PCA in these states?
Yeah, sure. So here we're heavily regulated by the states, both California and Arizona. So to be able to write a pesticide prescription here for any given crops, you have to be licensed by the state. It requires a lot of continual education. You need to have certain classes or a degree. And it's just basically you're responsible for all the pest control in that field for the season. And you have to meet food safety criteria, you have to meet state criteria, and then you have to make sure that that crop is safe for human consumption. You're 100% responsible as a PCA to take that crop from zero to harvest during the season.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility. So that PCA is 100% responsible, and I assume they have a lot of reports to manage and oversee, which is overseen by the state, right? In California, it's managed one way. Arizona's probably a little bit different, but they're very well regulated, by those states.
Yep, you gotta keep up with food safety audits, state audits, sprays. jobs. So everything is out there in this market.
Wow. That's very unique to, other parts of the country where, they're not as heavily regulated like that, and it definitely requires a lot of attention. And, one of the things that I know you, along with some of your colleagues, have been introducing recently is some different tools from our AGRIntelligence platform to help those PCAs become, I guess, more confident and help them best manage some of those crops. Can you share with with the group here some of those tools that are?
Sure. So we've been working on the diseases that heavily impact us during the winter season. The main crop that we grow here from September all the way to March is lettuce. Okay. And lettuce is heavily infected by downy mildew. It's a disease that you have to stay on top of the crop. Basically, you have to walk that field on a daily basis looking for it. It's very exhausting. It's very time consuming. And if you don't stay on top of it, all of a sudden you can come next morning and then now you have a crop that is infected. So we've been working for the last 3 years a project that is basically we're trying to forecast downy mildew before it happens. And we're doing this for onions and lettuce. And what we're trying to do is give these PCAs a source of data that they can use to pair that with their scouting. So in that way, if the data is telling them you're going to have an infection in the next 3-4 days, they can take a decision even before they see the disease in the field. And this is a novel tool that we're developing, we're testing, and it's gonna help them time pesticide application better, be it up on the front of the disease instead of following it.
Well, that's exciting stuff. So really, you're looking at predictive prescriptions in some cases, trying to predict, we anticipate that downy mildew, in this case, in the lettuce field, could be coming in the next few weeks or next few days in some cases for that grower. How will that information really, I guess, kind of change the game for our PCAs, our agronomists, our field folks, as well as our growers?
Well, basically, you're gonna be working or targeting those spray with more precision. You're gonna eliminate some of the guessing, and it's just about we're gonna be more precise. So at the end, we should have more successes,
right,
in that field.
Having that information ahead of the potential disease in this case, or fungus moving in to try to get ahead of it, maybe to curve it off a little bit with some different, fungicides and so forth to manage that particular crop. That's exciting stuff. So in addition to that type of technology, we were chatting earlier, and some of the things that we talked with other growers around this area, soil testing is extremely important, and High Ground. Tell us, High Ground is Helena's platform for soil testing. Can you tell us a little bit about how important and what kind of impact High Ground's bringing to this particular market in the desert?
That's the most heavily used solution that we use here in the desert, because we are in high saline soil. So basically, you were talking about water. Our water here has a lot of salts, and that's a problem for the grower, because you have to. It's not only the nutrients, you also have to mitigate those salts before you put a crop in the ground. Otherwise, you're going to have yield reduction, quality reductions. So with High Ground, we can go there before we even plant that crop in the field. We can do the proper diagnosis, do the correct amendment, and prepare that ground correctly for the crop that is coming next. In that way, it's easy to fix or provide a solution before you have a crop in the ground, because once you have the crop in the ground, there is just so little that we can do. So that's how we use High Ground. We use that as a pre-planning tool, trying to mitigate all those problems that are going to affect the crop in the season, but we do this prior to planting that crop. And High Ground is that tool that provides us the data to go and target, measure, target, and take an action, what we need to do to make sure that ground is ready for that crop that is coming. So High Ground is a very important tool here that we use to manage salts.
with the high ground report, you know, soil testing's been around for some time, but it really makes, I guess, a lot of science simple is the way I like to utilize this. How does the high ground report really help our salespeople communicate that information to the grower?
Well, it basically it provides so many layers of information, but what we do with this report is we got so many solutions that we can utilize to solve a problem. And it really allows us to identify the correct solution. We use those reports, we go through, we talk to the customer, we anticipate the problems. And by anticipating the problems, then we compare that with a specific solution that we had to put in that field to solve the problem. So without that data, I know I'm going to have a salt problem or sodium problem, but I don't know specifically what should I be doing to mitigate that.
Right.
So having that data, that report prior to it, then going through our solutions that we have from HPG, we can go and pair that with the correct solution.
And that all takes place on the front end, right before that grower decides to, put that lettuce or onion or whatever crop. And speaking of crops, you guys have a lot of crops in this region as well as Southern California. How many crops do you really are you responsible for, having some familiarity with?
Around 200.
200 crops. In the top 3 or 4 would be what?
Would be lettuce, celery, broccoli, carrots.
And I think you roll into some melons too in some markets. Of course, grapes, dates. I heard guys talking about dates the other day. Oh my gosh, you got all kinds of crops that I imagine you're studying agronomy books every night to keep up with those 200 crops.
It is hard to keep up because every crop is different. And you have to learn all those crops from top to bottom to be able to provide the correct solutions.
Well, and I think that's one of the nice things about some of the platform tools that we have in the AGRIntelligence platform is in that portfolio of tools. It really takes a lot of the guessing out of, trying to make things simple for not just our Helena reps, but also for the grower, because there's so much complexity there, especially with 200 crops, trying to manage all the, different, nutritional needs and so forth. Wow, that's certainly a lot of crops to manage. Another tool that is in the toolbox with AgriIntelligence is Inspecs, and your PCAs are very engaged in that side of the business. Can you share with us some of the things specifically in the desert? What's really needed with the Inspecs program, and some of the unique things that you guys are looking at, specifically around some of the traps and so forth. That you might be evolving with?
Well, other thing that we do under the Impact solution portfolio, we do irrigation management. You talk about water. Mm-hmm. That's a big tool that we're using right now to help those growers to help them use water efficiently. So we don't have more water. We still need to produce the same crops. And doing irrigation management for them, it helps us provide them like how much water they really need to put in that field. Mm-hmm. And we use a lot of weather data. We process that, and then on a weekly basis, we forecast like how much water they're gonna actually need for that week. In that way, they can save some water in there and still produce a good crop. Another thing that we do under the Impex brand, we do pest forecasting. We're working with models to forecast pest outbreaks.
Okay.
So in that way, we can also be more precise again with our pesticide applications, and we could be from 1 to 2 months ahead of that pest.
Oh, wow.
Before even showing the field.
So for example, trying to predict there could be some type of an insect outbreak. Is that what you're referring to, or some fungus?
I'm talking more about insects. So we're talking when we trap that moth.
Okay.
We're working on some projects to automate the trapping of this moth, and then from there we start counting the heat units. So we could forecast like how many days or actually months it's going to take for that moth to be developed and show in the field as a worm. So in that way, we know when we have to be looking for it.
Right.
Or if we're going to be proactive, we could target a spray job before that worm shows in the field.
So kind of going backwards, we're trying to identify, hey, we see the moths now, and based on Mother Nature, they could be actively feeding in 2 weeks, 10 days, whatever species.
Depending on the weather. We're just trying to be ahead of everything.
Right, yeah. Well, there's certainly a lot of complexity, especially in some high-value crops that you're involved with, much different than a lot of our customers that have row crops, but definitely a lot of different diseases that are impacting, because it's not just about yield, it's also very much about quality. Talking to some of the sales reps and as well as growers in this region, you're paid for yield, of course, but boy, if that quality doesn't make back,
it doesn't make it to the market.
It doesn't go to the market. That's right. Wow. Well, for sure, that is definitely some interesting areas, and of course, water management, as we opened it in the opening. With some of the general reductions in water across the nation, specifically off the Colorado River, impacting your market here in Arizona and California, having that information at your hands, at your fingertips, in a lot of cases, helping growers manage his or her water is very, very critical. Some other technologies that have definitely caught a lot of attention recently is just different ways of managing stand counts for different crops. What are some things that you and your team are, exploring in this area right now?
Where we're exploring, we've been talking about vegetables, some criteria that is very important to know if that vegetable is going to make it to market or not is sizing.
Okay. Sizing. Early in the season, it needs to have the right sizing. So we're working with some analytics where we can actually measure the sizing of some crops like lettuce, broccoli. And in that way, we can provide that layer information to the grower, and we can compare that to different varieties, different regions of the field where we're growing. And we it's not just only about yield. We have to also make sure that crop is growing correctly. So yes, and we're working on that too. So when you talk about sizing, and I think I understand this, that would be like, okay, if I have a head of lettuce, it has to be this, specific diameter, this specific size, and a lot of that has to do with packaging or requirements that the buyers, in this case, it could be a grocery store chain or a packer, would require. Is that correct? Yes, and it has to do a lot with logistics. So when these crews are coming to harvest in the field, you cannot have too many different sizes. Okay. Because that means they're going to have to skip so many plants, and then that's another cost that is added to the grower. So we're trying to have the most even crop across the whole block. Okay. And that way it can be harvested evenly. Okay, so when that crop is ready, everything's uniform, and we can send the crew through and harvest it all at the same time versus harvesting, 80% of it on one day and coming back 2 or 3 days later for the other 20%. Yeah, that's very costly to do. So we go early in the season, we measure that sizing using some analytics that we have, and that way we can measure we're growing that crop evenly or not. And if we still have time, we can make some corrections in there through different nutritionals or different fertilizers, that sort of thing. Yes. Okay, excellent. Well, that's definitely an exciting area. And what type of technologies are you utilizing to help discover this sizing at this time? We're using currently high-resolution imagery. Okay. And then we use a third-party provider to do the analytics. And I assume your team sits down with the grower after capturing this data to, sit down with him or her to really make some of those decisions to observe, their findings. Is that correct? Yeah, if we find a problem, definitely we sit with the grower, we go discuss it and say, this is the action that we need to take to make sure this gets corrected on time. Oh, wow, it's very proactive. Well, Luis, a lot of exciting things happening here in this part of California and Arizona as it relates to agronomy and agri-intelligence. It's a very evolving field, especially with some of the unique crops, these 200 crops that you have to observe and work with in this very unique market. Luis, we want to thank you for joining us here today at FieldLink and sharing your story, sharing a little bit of insight in this part of the country as we make our journey around the country, learning more and more about different crops and some of the people that are involved in helping them grow. So I want to thank you. Well, thank you for having me. We want to thank all of you for joining us on this episode of FieldLink. Be sure you subscribe and join us on all of the platforms that are most comfortable for you. And you can now listen to us on YouTube. as well as follow us on social media to stay in tune with the latest information from Helena as it relates to your farm, your field, and your acre. Thanks for joining us.